you for being with us.
Thank you.
Thank you also for being with us this afternoon. As many of you know, part of my responsibility is once or twice a year is to provide a speaker that's going to share some what I call quality information, meaning it's useful things that we can use. Last year I brought in an attorney because there had been some changes in how old your durable power of attorney could be, and so we had a really good presentation, lots of good follow-up. This year we have brought in a financial advisor from Edward Jones, but we're not here to talk about finances. We are here to talk about what is happening to all of us all of the time, and that is we live on our computers. And there are so many people out there working so hard to scam us in any number of different ways. And so what Brian is here, and I'm going to give him an official introduction here in a moment, but he is here to share with you some of the more common ones that have been happening in the last few years and have actually gotten more sophisticated in their process of trying to scam you. So we're going to share some of that information with you. Yes, we do have handouts on each one of the examples or samples he's going to go over with you. I have the handouts. We really wanted you to be able to have a cup of coffee, have a cookie, and just listen and talk. And then I have the handouts afterwards, so then you can decide if you want all of them or I just want the one on this and this information. I have all of those for you, okay? All right. Brian is a financial advisor with Edward Jones. Brian is also here because he is an individual who serves individuals who live here. The people that are referred to me, we go through a process of talking with them. We make sure they've been referred. As we say, they understand the rules when you're inside a senior community, what you can and cannot say and do while you are here. And so Brian is here because he was referred by one of your fellow residents, and as I say, he's agreed to all the rules. The other thing I would also like to tell you is that Edward Jones, as a corporation here in St. Louis, is a corporate partner with Lutheran Senior Services. And the one thing I want to share with you that they do, they also provide volunteer hours. And one of, in my opinion, the coolest things that they've done in the last few years is that they put on a senior prom for all of the individuals living in our affordable housing communities. So many of them had never had a senior prom or didn't attend the senior prom, and they put on a senior prom for all of them. It was awesome. So we want to thank Edward Jones for that. Brian actually is located right down the street on South Outer 40. It's in the People's National Bank building. Not there today because they have frozen pipes and no electricity. He is passionate about community, about servant leadership, and helping individuals and families live their best lives. We welcome Brian today to share information about how to spot the scams and resources you can use when you encounter them. So if you would please give Brian a nice, warm welcome.
Thank you for that, and I will attest that the rules here are just slightly above Edward Jones compliance. So, you know, at least I had a little bit of background in that before jumping in. Before we get started, I just want to kind of touch real briefly on what we're truly here for today. If you were thinking to yourself, I'm coming because they said snacks and coffee, we've got you covered. But outside of that, as was mentioned in the introduction, there's a growing number of scams and a growing amount of technology that goes into these scams. And so it's a great pleasure of mine to be able to do community-minded events like this in order to help individuals. If I can get my mom to listen to me, that'd be a whole other story. But at the end of the day, this is a great time and an opportunity for you to hopefully take one little piece of information from here and have it positively affect your life going forward. So with that, we'll give you a little bit more feedback on myself. Obviously, I am with Edward Jones, and I am just right down the street, kind of obligated compliance to say that. And prior to working for Edward Jones, I actually worked with a lot of nonprofit communities, and with that, did a lot of seminars. So When I found the culture of Edward Jones was one that served similarly to my prior roles, it was something that I became very passionate about, making sure that I was able to provide these types of services. So thank you for that opportunity. Now, just to make one other real quick introduction, because of the grace of Kirkwood School District, you'll see that my daughter is playing hooky today, or maybe they're letting her. So if you see her walking around, that's my daughter Lily. By all means, put her to work. All right, so let's get started here. All right, so we throw some numbers on the board. Of course, Edward Jones would have us start with numbers. But these are pretty impactful ones that we'll talk a little bit about as we go through the presentation, and for something that you think a little bit about as we think about some of these scams and as we get towards the end. 9 million, what is that about? 9 million Americans have their identity stolen each year, either individually or through a group data breach. Now, this isn't necessarily a senior number. This is just 9 million Americans in general, on average, are scammed in some way or lose their identity. Fraud and financial abuse schemes target the elderly, growing to $36.5 billion annually, according to the National Council on Aging, if you're familiar with that great group. It's actually one of the groups that I used to work with quite a bit in a prior career. They do great work. 1 in 24 of those cases are actually reported. So let that sink in just a little bit. If $36.5 billion is what we're aware of, and only 1 in 6 of those are actually reported, 1 in 24 of those are actually reported, think about the true impact of this truly nationally. Nearly 90% of abusers are people that the victims trust. 1 in 6 are victimized financially, and 1 in 24 are reported. Okay, so we're going to go through 5 common fraud scenarios, which is why most of you are here. We're going to talk a little bit about the red flags. We're going to talk about resources that you have, some additional steps that you have for protection, and at the end, like most things, once you learn about it, great reinforcement, a little bit of an interactive kind of friend or fraud that we'll go through at the end. Now, there's only 5 things on here, but I promise you, 4-ish hours is what we have today, so we should get you out of here by the time dinner rolls around, I think. Okay, so first one is collection fraud. So mainly what we're looking at here are companies calling, saying that you owe a past due bill, suggesting that they need money from you in some way. Typically, there might be an immediate thing that needs to happen. Right? Get out your card now, send your payments, etc. They might escalate to threats. If they find that you are wavering a little bit on the phone, or you're showing signs that you're a little bit nervous, they might escalate the matter to make sure that you follow through. They'll claim to have sent notices, even though you may not have received anything. And they'll claim that this is one of the most urgent things that you could possibly need to do right now. So some things you need to consider is, how do you typically pay this bill, right? Is this the electric company? Well, you probably call LSS and say, hey, did you guys pay the light bill? Caller ID. Is there one available? Is it not available? Is it a number that you're familiar with? Can you even trust caller ID these days? It's starting to get to the point where numbers can be spoofed a little bit too much. Next, really want to make sure in this scenario that you do a little bit of research, right? So if you kind of think back to the scenario, they claim that you've received something, or they sent something in the mail, you don't remember receiving it, right? They claim it's urgent, they say all these things, it's past due, you don't recall ever paying this credit card bill or something of that nature. So do a little bit of research before you would engage. And don't fall for scare tactics. That's the number 1 red flag. if you're on the phone with anybody and they're trying to scare you into doing something or trying to make it too urgent, that's always a good time to pause, get off the phone, collect yourself, okay? Now, if you do fall victim to collection fraud, what are some things that you can do? You can report it to the Attorney General's office. You can contact the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, and you can use Customer Financial Protection Bureau services, which we'll highlight all this information here later on. All right, grandparent scam. This is usually the most popular one. By a show of hands, is anybody not familiar with the grandparent scam? Great. So, what I'd like to highlight on this one is last August, if you're a News Channel 2 follower, they did a great expose, and you should still be able to follow it on their website, Trust But Verify. And there was a woman who lived in Baldwin, Missouri, right? So, way over there. She received a phone call from her grandson, and it plays out just like the story typically does. There he is right there. And the phone call was, "Grandma, I was just in an accident. Don't tell Mom and Dad. I'm supposed to be at school right now. I'm really nervous. I think the person I hit might be hurt. The police arrived, and I don't have a lot of time. Let me hand the phone off to somebody who can talk to you." They then handed the phone off to another gentleman who claimed he was the assigned bail bondman and will be working with the attorney to help get him out so that at a later date, of course, he can get full representation. So, of course, the woman heard her grandson's voice. She was very concerned for him. And he wasn't asking for a ton of money. I think it was $3,000, right? Keep that number in mind. So, what did she do? She actually went, got the money. This is where it starts to get scary. The gentleman then came to her home to collect the money to get him out of jail. Of course, what did he say? He knew all things, right? Like, this accident was on Manchester Road. Of course, she lived in Baldwin. I know where Manchester Road is. It all made a whole lot of sense. At the end of the day, it was a scam. By the time they realized it was a scam, she picked up the phone and called her grandson. He's like, "Grandma, I'm at school. What are you talking about? I've been in an accident." They started to put the pieces together. The police were involved. Luckily in the community, like most homes now, there were doorbell cameras and surveillance cameras, so they were able to catch the vehicle. And in doing so, they were able to track down the out-of-state plates, work with authorities from the different states, and pursue the gentleman, which I don't know if they ever caught them, but they had very accurate descriptions, pictures, everything. So here's the part that makes me a little bit more scared than the part that the gentleman came to her home. They found out that what they did was they went on social media and they were able to connect her to her, find out who her grandson was, just through comments and things that were happening there. Her grandson had posted some videos and had just enough sound bites of his voice that they were able to regenerate using their own words with his voice the very short conversation needed to get Grandma to think that this was actually happening. And then, of course, that's why he's passing it off to the other gentleman, right? So he had to introduce the true scammer after utilizing AI. So not only is this one that some of the big red flags here are the $3,000 I mentioned before, to kind of keep that in mind. It's a very common number that they'll ask for. They'll typically start smaller. Of course, the more open you are to engaging and giving money, those figures will grow, but 3,000 is a very, very common starting point. But just keep in mind the technology that they're using these days in regards to AI and other things, and now they're able to actually use a familiar voice to you to try to do these things. So If it's too good to be true, or if it's too scary, right? Kind of like with the last one, those scare tactics involved, a little bit of a red flag there. If there's a sense of urgency, take a pause, right? I think something that my mom used to always tell me is if it's broken today, it'll still be broken tomorrow. You don't have to solve it right this second. Trust but verify. All right. So here's one of my favorite ones, and Lily, close your ears for this one. Romance, long-distance relationship, or the sweetheart scam. So this one's interesting because what generally happens here is people who are lonely, maybe widows, widowers, right? That are maybe on social media looking for engagement, trying to maybe sometimes generate some comments, etc. Don't have a lot of friends. Suddenly they become victims of this. Because what tends to happen is somebody will start to watch some of the posts and information that they're putting out, and then they'll start to engage with them through private messaging. Maybe sympathize or empathize, a couple comments here and there, right? So-and-so's sick, oh, I'm so sorry to hear about that. And maybe they overlook the fact that, wait a minute, out of the friends that I have, this isn't really a name that I recognize, but they're being so kind, right? Something like this, whatever that beginning impetus is, then turns into another channel, and then that goes on from there. Unfortunately, what the end goal is going to be is to start asking for money, right? So what ends up happening is, actually know somebody this happened to. They were a big fan of an actor. This actor claimed to be reaching out to them. Kind of silly, they're pretty famous. And then suggested that maybe they would meet, and then had this concocted story where their plane was delayed. They were trying to get into the area, but they didn't have money and they couldn't get to their manager. Right? So this is a gentleman who has millions and millions and millions of dollars, right? Needs a couple $1,000s, again, that $2,000-$3,000 threshold where they originally start asking for, because it's below the red flags for the banking systems, so that they can buy a plane ticket, right? So they progress through this until the person either wises up, or maybe they go to their financial advisor and they ask for a little bit more money, and we start asking questions, right? Like, you called last week, you needed $2,000. You said it was for a plane ticket. We didn't think much about it. Now a week later, you need $5,000. Let's dive a little deeper into this. This is not normal for you, right? At the end of the day, they were enlightened, found out Keanu Reeves was not courting them, unfortunately. And although I think they're still Keanu Reeves' biggest fans, because he didn't do it. So, but this is another common one online where people are trying to scam.
Brian, can I add something?
Sure.
Simply because it just happened. Cruises. You meet a lot of people on cruises and you share phone numbers and different things. My brother is one of those people, he and his wife, that, they got bit by the cruise thing and they're gone all the time. But they have lots of other friends who are widowed or single that go with them, and they have noticed an increase in one particular friend started getting phone calls and ultimately started asking for money and different things. So you don't even realize how sometimes when you're out just doing what you're doing, how much of your personal information you're sharing without even thinking about it.
Absolutely. It's a great example. I'm going to steal that for my next seminar. And nobody drinks on those cruise ships, so I don't know how they can start just sharing that information. Okay. Lottery sweepstakes. So this is kind of similar to the first one that we went over, but is anybody familiar with the Publishers Clearinghouse?
Yeah.
Right. That's really where the big part of this scam started, was calling individuals, telling them that they won, suggesting that they had to do something to get the proceeds. It could be something like a new car. It could be lottery, a raffle ticket. This one's interesting to me because I'm actually familiar with somebody who was going to a church picnic. They bought some raffle tickets, they left before the drawing, and then somehow, inadvertently, they ended up getting this scam phone call, and they really thought that they won the raffle ticket for the church picnic. So they took it a little bit too far, ultimately didn't get scammed, but it's another one that's commonly used. Now, what they're typically going to ask you to do is either pay taxes, fees, administrative costs, something of that nature. It's that quid quo pro that they're looking for, right? Again, give us $2,000, $3,000, that should cover this, that, and the other. Send this money, then we'll go ahead and make sure facilitating getting the prize, right? Kind of akin to the, was it the old Nigerian king scams that used to be emails going around 20 years ago, where people would suggest that they're wealthy, but if you do this, you'll inherit this wealth because they don't have any heirs or some sort. So again, the big red flag here is typically it's too good to be true, right? You just won the lottery, a new car, all these things. Big grandiose prize. If you just do this thing, red flag every time. If they ask you not to tell anybody about it, another big red flag. Anything that's hush-hush or secrecy, just like the grandparent scam. Don't tell mom and dad, I'm supposed to be in school, or don't tell anybody about this prize. We'll do the announcement on TV, those types of things. And one other key there, just as a takeaway, is when you get into anything like that that's financial, not a bad idea to have a trusted financial contact, whether it's somebody like myself, a bank, or otherwise, that you can run things by as well. Because of course, you need to make sure if it's real, it goes into the account, right? Social Security scam is our fifth and final one. See, we're only 2 hours in. You guys are doing great. This one is typically going to involve an issue with an upcoming tax, Social Security payment, and this is one to really be on the lookout right now. As many of you probably are aware, there's COLA increases going into effect right now. Tax season is upon us. Whether you're filing or waiting for your 1099s and documents, these are going to be the types of things where somebody's going to reach out suggesting they're either with Social Security Administration, with the IRS. The key to this one, the biggest red flag is we all pretty much, did anybody here work for the government? Great. Oh, all right, well, I'll only offend one person. We all know the government doesn't outreach, right? They don't work that hard. They'll send you a letter. They're not going to call you. If you've ever had a problem with your Social Security and you need to reach out to them, it's a real quick, easy phone call, right? Right. So big red flag there. Again, they use that sense of urgency. But a quick note, the FTC wants to make sure that we share that 3,200 people reported this in 2017, collectively losing $210,000. Just 2 short years later, in 2019, it collectively lost $10 million. I don't have any data or figures since then. Maybe they stopped tracking due to COVID. But that's an exponential increase in just 2 years. So, a couple of quick highlights. They'll never call you. Also, the Social Security Administration already knows your Social Security number. So if they ever call you and ask you for it, that might be a red flag there too. They're also never going to ask, and this one kind of shocked me, but it happens a lot. They won't ask you to make a payment in an alternative currency, which is very common these days. They might ask you to use cryptocurrency or something else to facilitate a payment. That should be a pretty easy red flag. Do keep in mind that when you do your taxes these days, most tax professionals, CPAs that you work with, already have your banking information. And as you know, once it's submitted, you just get the money into your bank account. or they take it out of your bank account if you're, working that side of the system. So they're never really going to call you with these types of things. They already have a way to facilitate. Okay, so general highlights that really come down to every one of these are identity verification. Make sure that you're able to identify the person that's calling you, and make sure that you're not over-identifying yourself, right? If somebody truly has legitimate business with you, they should know enough about you that you can validate with key pieces, but not entire things. So what's your last four versus what is your social security number, right? Do you live on South Outer 40? Or what is your address, right? Big difference there. Immediate requests, big red flag. Anything that's urgent, again, kind of going back to my mom's guidance. It's a problem today, it'll be a problem tomorrow. Take some time, sleep on it, think about it. Shouldn't be that big of a deal in 24 hours. Also, things that just simply don't add up. Like, you can't win the lottery if you didn't buy the ticket. The IRS won't demand payments over the phone. Just kind of consider, does this make sense, right? Is it logical? Or do I just want it to be true? I know sometimes that's hard. Be wary of any payments that need to be in cash, wired, or a gift card. It's a big corporate scam that they try to play on executive secretaries or underlings, is that the CEO is too busy and needs you to do this thing, but you can put it on your expense report. By the time those gift cards are purchased and sent off or whatever is done, it's gone. And then you probably lose your job. The other is, did a statement actually show up recently? Did you make a payment, right? Most people sit down, they know where their payments are going. If you were late on something, you probably would be expecting the phone call, or you'd be proactive in figuring out your next steps. So if something kind of comes out of left field, it might not be a bad idea to move away. And of course, the last one, pretty easy. Any vow of secrecy, don't tell anybody, right? Whether it's, this will be announced at a later date, on TV, so we don't want you to, or don't tell mom and dad, or whatever the case may be. Anytime you're asked not to share or information or keep it a secret, it's probably the first thing you should do, is go to your neighbors, knock on the door, and say, you won't believe the phone call I just got. Oops. It's going to throw my water in the ground. Good thing I put a cap on it. Okay, so what can we do? We can protect all our personal information by never providing information or phone call via mail or email. We can shred our financial documents. And I didn't ask, but I'm going to assume that you guys probably have a shredded service here, maybe at the building. I would think that if you're done with your paying your bills and whatnot, you would likely be able to drop them off at the office and they can have them shredded rather than just throwing them in your wastebasket. Be best practice to always shred things. Now, if you do work with a financial advisor or a bank, if their shredded bin is full, you can always drop it by our offices. We're happy to offer that service as well. When it comes to online, make sure that you're updating your computer and your passwords. I hate to break it to you, but first child, second child is probably not a great password, right? So for me, that would be Gage Lily. That's pretty easy to guess, right? Games, ads, those types of things on social media. We refer to them quite often as clickbait, right? There's a reason for that. They want to get you in, they want to engage you. And then from those things, you may click on some buttons to accept moving to maybe the next screen. And in doing so, you may actually provide access to either your computer, your phone, or your information in some way. So you want to try to kind of stay away from those games that might be out there on the internet that found you, is maybe a good way to put it, right? If you're playing a game that you're seeking out, like Wordle, it's one of my favorites, play it every morning, or like a solitaire or something like that that's securely downloaded on your computer, great. But if it's something that comes through your inbox or through your social media, might want to abstain playing the games, or, as I'd love my mother-in-law to stop doing, answering password-style questions online, right? So we're all very prideful. Who was your first grade teacher? Everybody knows who my mother-in-law's first grade teacher is because she will put it on there every time. That is Mimi. As far as credit is concerned, make sure that you check it frequently. Always review your statements. And if anything happens, tell your bank about the fraud. And make sure that they can put a stop or an alert on your credit for 90 days if anything happens. It's just a good protective feature that if you find something, you can always lift it. But for 90 days, it'll stop any further activity just in case. Now, if you have any compromised accounts, you want to make sure that you close them. Contact fraud departments at your banking institutions as well as the other financial institutions that you have, because once they get maybe, say, a checking account piece of information, they may have access just enough of it to find out where it's tied into, and they might be moving before you are onto those other institutions. File a report with law enforcement, and then get verification of your disputes. Okay, so resources. And again, we have a handout for this, so you don't have to write them all down. Take too diligent of notes. But your state's attorney general office is really the first place that you typically want to go, especially if it's business related. The FTC, or the Federal Trade Commission. Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. Of course, the Better Business Bureau. Internet Crime Compliance Center. Local law enforcement, your financial institutions, and of course your local Edward Jones fraud investigations. There's just a couple plugs in here, it's okay. Okay, so as I mentioned before, we're going to highlight a couple scenarios. We're going to talk about the red flags and the resources, and now we get to the fun part at the end. It wasn't flipping anything, but it is called friend or fraud. There's only 42 more pages. Okay, so for this, we're just going to go through some quick scenarios, and by all means, shout out what you think. Is this a friend or a fraud? Let me read the first scenario. Your neighbor, Joe, tells you a man knocked on his door yesterday. He's collecting money for the food pantry. We'd like to support the food pantry, right? Although he couldn't remember the name of the food pantry, he remembers the man saying he was part of the Good Neighbor Food Group. When Joe asked the man if he had a business card or any literature about the organization, the man said he'd stop back by with more information. So Joe's asking, what do you think? Is this a fraud? There you go. So, why do we think? What are the red flags? What's the first one? There you go. He didn't have any identification. He didn't have a shirt that identified him. He didn't have any literature, a business card, anything of that nature to validate who he was. And for those of you that missed the joke, I put a business card on all your chairs so you know I'm legit. He had no way to positively identify, and this was completely unsolicited. Right? Came to his door, food pantries never heard of, couldn't identify who he was, needs money, and oh, don't worry about it, I'll bring you or mail you some information later. Not a good sign. All right, second scenario. You receive a phone call from a credit card provider. It's Client Fraud Investigation Unit. So they're helping you, right? The caller asks you to verify your account information, including your credit card number. Right. Exactly. So the red flags are, again, it's unsolicited contact. You weren't expecting this phone call, just like that knock on the door or many of these other things. That's one of the key patterns to keep an eye on in this. When things come out of the blue, might be a good time to pause. Doesn't mean that they're wrong, but may not necessarily be the best bet. No way to positively identify the caller in question. And then rather than giving you the card, asking you to validate maybe the last 4 digits or something of that nature, they want you to read the entire credit card number. That's always going to be a big red flag for you. All right, third scenario. This one I think is actually kind of interesting. Somebody got creative here. You receive a letter from a law firm that includes a gas bill dated 6 months ago, and it's marked past due. The letter states that you're delinquent in paying and that your natural gas will be shut off in 3 days unless you make an immediate payment via credit card or a wire to the law office. This is the first and only notice that you've ever received, and to your knowledge, the gas bill is up to date. Becky said so. Friend or fraud? Right. The part that I find most interesting about this is the creativity around using a law firm, for a gas bill. That's amazing. I would think the truck would show up in front of your house first and just turn it off. They're not going to get a lawyer. So the third party, big red flag. And it's your first notice, you never heard about it, and of course, it's extremely urgent. So, quick little recap here before we depart. Don't answer any unknown numbers is kind of the best practice these days. If you know somebody, you most likely have their number programmed in your phone, right? Whether it's your children, your friends, your neighbors, etc., or you at least recognize that number because you speak to them frequently. If you don't, screening that phone call, letting it go to voicemail, again, nothing's that urgent. They can always leave you a message. If you find the need to call them back, do it. But resisting the urge to just pick up numbers that you are unaware of, avoidance can get you out of a lot of hot water. You can always call somebody back. Of course, don't click on links or emails or ads on social media. Anything in a link can be something that it's not necessarily what you thought it was intended to be. It can take you somewhere else. Don't play games or interact in social media. Contact trusted professionals, government resources if you're involved in a scam. And my dad being retired law enforcement, I don't know if he'll ever get this one, but don't play detective. Once something's there, avoidance is your best solution, and put it in the trusted professional hands. Whether it's a financial crime and you need to go to a fraud or compliance department to help you with the matter, local law enforcement or otherwise. But getting involved, you could potentially provide even more information inadvertently by trying to play detective with them and make things worse. All right, any questions? Here we go.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate that, Brian. Thank you very, very much. Yes, ma'am.
I have a question. You didn't mention anything about email, well, a lot of emails that are coming through, where you get something that says that you have, I just got one today that said that, that I have a PayPal, $500 some odd, and did I request this to be coming out of my PayPal, which I don't even have PayPal. Then you always look at the email address of whom it came from, because it has like
Correct.
And I get those a lot.
I had 3 of them over the last few days, saying my PayPal account, blah, blah, blah. I don't have a PayPal account. And that's what Brian's talking about, is that we have to be so careful. Those are phishing. That's one of the biggest things that's going on now with all of our email accounts, is that there's just, and the bad part is, it's all AI, it's all artificial, it's a machine. They're just putting random numbers in and just sending all kinds of random addresses out there, and amazed at how many of them somebody responds to. So I'll leave this to Brian, but yeah, the worst part is, here's what I get in trouble for. I don't read the return address, like you said, the email address. It looks like something I know, and I just go ahead and click it. And it really wasn't, when you looked at it correctly, there was letters that were wrong or added letters or something.
Yep, so we actually do a whole other seminar just on this topic, and I won't keep you for another 4 hours, I promise. But that really is the first key. Obviously, some of this plays connection to what we were just talking about. If you don't have a PayPal account, you didn't pay anybody $572 that you're aware of. But going to what is the labeling, so it might say PayPal, and clicking on it will give you the true email address behind it. And then it'll be some gobbledygook at Gmail or AOL or something.com at the end of that. And that's definitely going to be a big red flag. Most organizations, and you can apply these filters on your personal computers, will also take down any of the downloaded images in an effort to kind of unveil things for you. And so not having those things automatically download is a very positive thing to enable on your computer. And of course, just not clicking on any links that you're unfamiliar with or that were unsolicited.
It's hard.
It's a never-ending battle to keep your information your information. You know, technology has been great and we love it, and there's so many things about it that are wonderful, but it also comes with some responsibility that we have to really slow down and pay attention and look at those things. All of the scenarios and things that Brian went over today, I have over here with the coffee and the cookies, where I have a handout for each one of those. So it has the information he covered, but also in the back it has the resources, some telephone numbers, some places to go to get that information. Also, in this same category of information, and I think the email issue has been added to it, I have in the past a few times used some of the assistant or associate attorney generals to come in, and Missouri, they have a great program and they have a lot of resources in their booklet. We might look at using them maybe next year to see if they include the email information, and they would have a lot of resources, who to call and where to call type thing. The big thing too is to remember to, again, if it's your banking information or if it's someone who in essence is, as he says, threatening you. I mean, I've had those before where they tell me, you know, they're calling about, I don't even know what it is, but I've had them more than once say to me, well, you do realize that if we don't handle this now, there will be a warrant issued for your arrest. Well, I've learned from the police, right then you can call them and give them, you know, show them the telephone, you know, all the information that you can, because they've crossed the line when they've said that they've issued that warrant for your arrest. So, and most of us don't want to do it because we're embarrassed that, you know, we let someone do that. And that was what he was talking about. A lot of people don't report these different things. I will tell you a true story very quickly, and then we'll let you go, and that is, again, you all know I've been doing this for a long time, and this was just a few years ago at Meridian Village, an LSS community. Smart woman, well-educated, great person. Grandparent scam. Son-in-law is an attorney. Those didn't have anything to do with the fact that, and she didn't think it sounded like her grandson after she got to thinking about it, but he said he had a cold. But he knew so many details about the family and the brothers, and you know, just so many specific details that convinced her that it was her grandson that had a cold. So it can happen to any one of us. We have to be brave enough to say, hey, it happened to me and I need help, and figured it out and straightened it out. So thank you so much for coming today. And please, if you want to pick up some handouts, I didn't copy a lot of all of them. I made about 50 copies of each one. But if there's something you do not get as far as one of the handouts, I have all of them and I can make more copies. So again, thank you so much for coming and sharing some time this afternoon.